world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Tuesday, October 21st, as you're listening to this. And we got a lot to talk about. There is always stuff going on in the world of news and politics. It never seems to stop, no matter how hard we try. We would love to go back to something normal, like Barack Obama's tan suit being the biggest scandal, or the uneventful years of Joe Biden, but that is not where we're at right now. We have a toddler in the White House in Donald Trump, somebody who does things at a whim of a hat, and, he changes his opinion back and forth depending on who he talked to last or what happened, etc. And it's hard to know what he is going to do from one moment to the next. Now, today I am pulling double duty. I am recording this podcast after having recorded another podcast. Those of you who have followed me over from the Rational Boomer know how often I am a guest on that program. And I reached out to Mike and said, hey, I got some free time. Do you want to guest tonight? So we sat down, we recorded a podcast, talked for about an hour and a half, hour 45. And we had a great conversation. So I recorded that, and now I'm recording the Analytical Iowan podcast that you're listening to now. So it was a great conversation. We covered a lot of topics. We talked about the midterms. We talked about the government shutdown. We talked about Russia, Ukraine. And there's probably going to be some overlap with what you hear here. Only the difference is you're not going to be getting Mike's perspective as well. So I encourage you to not only check out this podcast, but to take the time to go check out the Rational Boomer. If you're not following him already, give him a listen. You can find him on YouTube or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Now, we are in day 21 of this government shutdown as you're listening to this, and there doesn't appear to be an end in sight. Now, what we are finding out is that Republicans aren't negotiating. I talk about that almost daily, but they're not. They are not negotiating at all when it comes to this government shutdown. Now, you're going to hear MAGAs and Republicans come out and say, well, Democrats should, fund the government, open the government back up, pass the clean CR. Republicans did it for Democrats. Why can't Democrats do it for Republicans? Well, there are key differences here. And, those of us of average intelligence or above, we can spot the key differences. They don't see the differences. And one of those differences being the Affordable Care Act subsidies are set to expire at the end of the year. So here we are on October 21st. That puts us about, 71, 72 days away to the end of the year. That is not a good sign for these Affordable Care Act subsidies. If they don't get it extended, a lot of people are going to have their health care premiums go up. And we may already be getting close to the point of no return for this year, because a lot of places have to already have decided what those premiums and stuff are going to look like. And if they don't have the subsidies, they're going up. Now, maybe they have two different pricing points where they say, okay, well, this is the plan you get should the government pass the subsidies. But if they don't, here is your higher premium. That still makes people making a difficult choice. They have to assume the subsidies aren't going to be in place, and they have to decide what expensive health care plan do they get. Do they go without health care now because they can't afford it because the subsidies are gone? And what do? This is a problem for Republicans. They think they're winning the messaging battle here, that they're winning this government shutdown fight, but they really aren't. Democrats are holding strong. They're holding the line, and they are no closer to passing any sort of resolution when it comes to funding the government. Now, the other key difference between this and previous years and previous CRs that Republicans have signed off on, besides the fact that the Affordable Care Act subsidies are expiring this year, and Republicans had promised to talk about it later, well, later is now here, in between the last CR, which was in March, and the CR we are dealing with now, they issued the One Big Beautiful Bill and a rescissions package. Now, the One Big Beautiful Bill cut a bunch of funding to a bunch of programs, including SNAP benefits, Medicaid benefits, and things like that. They cut over $1 trillion or almost $1 trillion to Medicaid over 10 years. Well, this new CR would go with the new levels established by the One Big Beautiful Bill. And Democrats are saying that's a non-starter. We need to go back to what you negotiated in good faith in March when they agreed with Democrats and Republicans passed the CR then that said keep funding levels the same. They were going to operate on 2024 funding levels. But since then, they passed that big, beautiful bill that cut a bunch of funding and cut a bunch of programs. And now Republicans are saying, but you need to pass a clean CR. No, we don't. You guys have control of all of the whole Congress. You have the presidency. You could gut the filibuster and, pass it without a single Democratic vote. Problem is, you don't want to do that. You want to keep the filibuster because, one, you are expecting to be in the minority at some point. It could happen as early as 2026 after the midterms. And two, I think you want Democrats to sign off on the One Big Beautiful Bill cuts by passing this clean CR. So when it starts to affect people and, when rural hospitals and other places start losing Medicaid payments, when SNAP benefits go into effect, et cetera, you can say, well, see, Democrats passed this clean CR with those new funding levels. They're okay with it. They could have prevented it. They could have stopped it and not take any accountability or any blame for the damage you've caused. But that's, I think, what's going on there. So this clean CR is not truly a clean CR. And they need Democratic support to get it through the Senate. So they have now held 11 votes on the same package that passed the House earlier in September. And the House hasn't even been around since they passed that package. They are now going on almost a month or maybe just over a month since they were last in session. They have decided that they don't need to be there. They don't need to do work. And they're not going to do anything until after the Democrats agree to pass their version of the clean CR in the Senate. And, they might show up to do any sort of reconciliation work, but that's about it. When it comes to any form of negotiation, Republicans have the same talking point. Open the government first, and then we'll talk. The problem is Democrats have repeatedly fallen for those kind of lines from Republicans where they say, we'll talk later. Well, the later never comes. In this case, the later's here when it comes to the Affordable Care Act subsidies, and they're still saying, let's talk about it later. Well, with there only being about 70 days left in the year, when are they going to want to talk about it? When is later? They're going to talk about it on December 31st? Or are they going to wait till March 5th? Or how about, December 25th next year? Wait till Christmas. What is their end game here? The whole idea is they don't want the Affordable Care Act subsidies to be in effect because they want the Affordable Care Act to fail. I've been talking about this. I think what they are trying to do is by not putting the subsidies in place, they are trying to make healthcare completely and totally unaffordable for the American consumer. So the Affordable Care Act fails. So they have an easier time and more voter support for repealing it, for getting rid of it without needing to have a plan in place to replace it. Right now, it is, mostly popular. There are a lot of people who have forgotten what it was like before the Affordable Care Act was even around and how bad insurance companies could mess with you. They could hit you with lifetime maximums. And they could say, we're not covering this. They could deny coverage if you change jobs. They could say, okay, what are your pre-existing conditions? What have you had? Yeah, we're not covering you anymore for those new jobs. Even though this is a new job, you had that condition before you applied here. Yeah, our plan's not just not going to cover you. You can forget about that. They used to be able to tell babies that were born with certain problems that, well, you were born with it, pre-existing condition, we're not going to cover it. And a lot of those things were ended with the Affordable Care Act. Another thing that was ended because of the Affordable Care Act was it used to be when you were 18, you could not be claimed as a dependent on a parent's health plan. Now, there were some ways you could get around that. They could put you on your plan as like a full adult with even higher premium. But for some places and some people, that was not a tenable option. At 18, you had to go out and get your own health plan. Now, with the Affordable Care Act, you are deemed a dependent until you are 26. So there's been a lot of good come out of the Affordable Care Act. And Republicans want to find a way to get rid of it, and they can only do that if it's unpopular. They can't get rid of it if people like it, and they never have a plan to actually replace it. Remember, during Donald Trump's first term, he kept saying he had a health care plan and it was coming in 2 weeks. We heard that for 4 years. And then in the debate with Kamala Harris, he said he had concepts of a plan, but we still haven't seen even what those concepts of a plan are. We hear other Republicans say they have ideas of what they can do to fix the Affordable Care Act, but none of it ever gets introduced in legislation. It makes great talking points when you're talking to the media and when you're talking to constituents of, oh, yes, we want to do this, we want to fix it. But then when it comes down to it, they don't actually have a plan and they don't care. How do I know Republicans don't care? Well, look at what Senator Joni Ernst here in Iowa said earlier this year at a town hall event. She was at a town hall event before she decided not to run for re-election. And this was before the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill. And she was asked by constituents who were concerned, who were scared that they were going to lose their Medicaid coverage. And what happened? Well, she said, hey, yeah, it's no big deal. We're all going to die anyway. We're all going to die anyway, was her response. And then over the summer, she was at the Iowa State Fair, again, meeting with constituents before she made her announcement that she was not seeking re-election. And what did she say to this constituent? Well, the constituent asked her, what do you want me to do with these cuts to Medicaid? I will lose, health insurance for my child, and they have XYZ health condition. I don't remember what it was, and said without it, we won't be able to get them health coverage. We can't afford private insurance. So what do you expect me to do? She says, well, we'll take it under advisement. Take it under advisement. You'd already passed the One Big Beautiful Bill by that point, but you hadn't decided if you were going to run for re-election. Take it under advisement. What does that even mean in that context? I think she realized that her take on healthcare, those lines were going to cost her the election. That's why she didn't run again. But that just shows exactly how out of touch these Republicans are when it comes to healthcare. They don't realize the bind most Americans are in, especially considering, as members of Congress, they get access to some of the best healthcare in the nation, and it comes included with their pay. They don't have to pay out of pocket for healthcare, as far as I know, and they have access to like what we want for everybody. So the whole problem here is they're at an impasse and they're not negotiating. House of Representatives isn't around, and Mike Johnson's not there to negotiate. As I've talked about before, if they were serious about negotiating and serious about opening the government back up, they may end up at a point where Republicans would say, well, we can't do indefinite Affordable Care Act subsidies, but we can do 2 years or 3 or something, and it would be a starting point. Now, ultimately, I do think that the Republicans are going to have to cave in this fight. Democrats, I just don't see them caving after holding out for now 3 weeks. And if they held out for 3 weeks, kept the government closed for 3 weeks, when they appear to be winning the narrative movement here, I don't see why they would cave and just open the government and get nothing out of it. So ultimately, they will probably come to some kind of a deal, and it would not surprise me if that deal includes something like 3 or 4 years of Affordable Care Act subsidies, kicking it out past the midterms and maybe even past the next general election. Because that would be beneficial to both parties, so they don't have to deal with it in the midterm fight or in the general election. They can say, well, it's not a problem right now. We can deal with it later. We've got plans, and they can spin their usual narratives. I think that might be how this shutdown fight ultimately comes to an end, but I think Republicans may end up backing out. But as Mike and I were talking about when I was on the Rational Boomer podcast today, there may be a date coming up here where they actually get down to nut cutting time and actually do some work and open the government back up. And when is that? Well, that is November 1st, as we are finding out that food stamp benefits and SNAP benefits are not going to be paid out if the government continues to be shut down. They don't have funds anywhere they can move around. There is no authorization. And unless they pass something through Congress allowing for that money to be dispersed, it's just not going to happen. And as you start dealing with people who are expecting to receive their SNAP benefits and they start going hungry, there is going to be a lot of angry constituents, and public opinion is going to turn against the party in charge, which in this case is the Republicans. They're the ones holding out. They're the ones not negotiating. I just don't see Democrats coming out as the villains in this, because on top of that, they aren't the ones who passed the one big beautiful bill. That also includes cuts to SNAP benefits, etc. As people start going hungry, they're going to be looking for someone to blame, and it's going to be the Republicans. And one of the things you need to consider, too, not only are they not going to have their SNAP benefits, and according to one report I saw, it's looking like maybe about 135,000 people just here in the state of Iowa would lose access to their SNAP benefits because of the funding shortfall, because the government would be closed and there would be no appropriations. And, if it goes too deep into the month, there are going to be a lot of people mad, but they're going to be turning to other sources to get food, including food banks. Here's the problem. Most food banks that require or accept government funding of some kind are going to be facing budget shortfalls, as this administration has cut funding from varying programs that would aid food banks in acquiring food. So they're not going to have the funds to be able to give out nearly the food they used to. And this is just a bad sign all the way around, and people are going to be pissed. Here in Iowa, starting in January, when it comes to the food stamp program, they have decided that they are going to start limiting what you can buy on the food stamps. They applied to the USDA under the Trump administration and got a waiver for not allowing certain foods, including certain cheeses, certain meats, certain fresh meats, no pre-made bakery goods of any kind, no cakes, no cookies, no donuts, none of that stuff, no pre-made cold foods, because as you know, a lot of grocery stores now have, delis or kitchen areas where they might have, a simple dinner, like maybe a meatloaf dinner or chicken strips or something with a couple sides. And it used to be here in Iowa, and it is till the end of this year anyway, that you could buy those on your SNAP benefits, on your food stamps. That's going to be disallowed. No teas, no juices unless they're 100% juice. No sugar, no Kool-Aid packets. I think even bottled water is going to be not allowed anymore here in Iowa under the program. No sugars, no cake mixes, no flour, no spices, no gravy mixes. There's just a whole list of things that are going to be removed from the food stamp program. And again, people are going to be pissed, and they have no one to blame but Republicans. And I think Republicans are going to realize that these ideas are not as popular as they have led themselves to believe. I think they got caught up in their own hype, and that they actually believe they are this silent majority that they like to talk about, when in fact they are a very vocal minority. So this government shutdown may come to an end because of people not getting their food stamps. There's also something else that could cause the end to this government shutdown. Now, we have Representative Grijalva from Arizona, still has not been sworn in to take her seat. She won her election like a month ago. And Mike Johnson keeps trying to come up with reasons as to why he hasn't sworn her in yet. He's trying to say, well, we can't swear him in during a government shutdown. We can't swear her in when we're not in session. She needs to quit trying to seek attention and get to work and work for her constituents, when she doesn't have access to a computer, doesn't have access to phone lines, doesn't have access to her budget, can't really hire staffers. She can sit in her office and twiddle her thumbs all day, but can't really do any work because of rules in place that will not allow her access to those things until she has taken the oath of office and officially become a member of Congress. So what's the holdup? Well, Mike Johnson is trying to prevent her from becoming the 218th signature on the discharge petition to hold a vote for the Epstein files. Now, that's the thing. They don't want to hold this vote over the Epstein files. Donald Trump doesn't want them to hold a vote over the Epstein files. Donald Trump wants it to go away. And Mike Johnson is doing everything in his power to make this vote on releasing the Epstein files go away. And by trying to not hold a vote on this discharge petition, or not allowing her to come into Congress to sign the discharge petition, Mike Johnson is effectively extending the shutdown because the House of Representatives is not there doing any sort of work or any sort of negotiations. So how might this discharge petition lead to the government opening back up? Well, what could happen is that another Republican member of the House of Representatives gets sick and tired of what is going on, and they vote to sign the discharge petition just to give Mike Johnson an out to bring everybody back and swear her in. That they could say, I am tired of us being gone. We need to get to work. We need to open the government back up. Screw you, Mike Johnson. I'm signing the discharge petition. Now you don't have an excuse to swear her in. Let's go back to work. Call us back into session, and we'll start going. Now, could a Republican sign that discharge petition? Of course. So far, 4 have. And it's not outside the realm of possibility that another Republican would sign off on this discharge petition just because they are sick of not being there to do any work. They want to get the government back open, and they're tired of getting their butts kicked in the media about not being there and not doing any work. But if they sign off on the discharge petition, Mike Johnson has a problem. Donald Trump wants it to go away. So what could happen? Well, there's an entire real possibility that, the discharge petition comes up for a vote. Donald Trump gets pissed off, calls his MAGA buddies in Congress, says, get rid of Mike Johnson. They hold a vote to vacate the chair, and there is no reason as to why Democrats would save Mike Johnson, other than the fact that he is completely and totally incompetent. And, who else would the Republicans get? But this is a very real scenario where no matter who signs as the 218th signature on the discharge petition, it gets brought up for a vote, and Donald Trump gets pissed off, and they try to oust the speaker. And they could do that. Now, what happens when there's no speaker? Well, the House of Representatives grinds to a halt. By rules, they are not allowed to do anything until they have elected a speaker. And the last time they needed a speaker, it took them 3 weeks to come up with Mike Johnson, a representative we had never really heard of. And they are probably going to have to do something like this as well, go through rounds and rounds and rounds of voting, and then suddenly somebody like Mike Johnson is going to pop up that we had never heard of, and suddenly he's going to have enough votes in the House to get passed. However, also with their thin majority of only like 2 or 3 seats, it is entirely possible that a couple of Republicans could side with all Democrats if they need to elect a new speaker and put in, say, Speaker Hakeem Jeffries. Now, it would be unusual for the minority party to be the speaker, but because of Mike Johnson's antics and everything going on right now, they may decide it is in their best interest to put in somebody normal or even an opposition person like Hakeem Jeffries, to where, sure, maybe nothing gets really accomplished in the House of Representatives, but they don't damage their brand any further, and they don't damage their party any further going into the 2026 midterm elections. They're worried about whether or not they're going to get reelected. I guarantee you they're worried about it. They're not worried about it enough to the point where they decide that they don't want to be associated with Donald Trump anymore, but they're worried nonetheless because they're talking about it. And for example, somebody who is coming out as the voice of reason in the Republican Party is Marjorie Taylor Greene. And the simple fact that I had to say Marjorie Taylor Greene and voice of reason in the same sentence should almost leave me speechless. But I got a podcast to do. I got to keep going. But yes, she has come out and said that they need to get past the shutdown. They need to open the government back up. Now, she stopped short of saying that they need to extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies as part of opening the government back up, but she has said they need to do something and they can't let those subsidies expire. Why? Because as she put it, and I'm going to paraphrase here because I don't remember her exact words, but people are going to be looking at the 2026 midterms through the lens of their wallet. And that is true. If people are living paycheck to paycheck going into the midterms, they're going to look around for someone to blame. I was talking about that with the food stamp cuts and not getting food stamp benefits potentially in November. They're going to be looking for someone to blame. And who do you blame? The party in power. You can't blame the Democrats here in this case because the Democrats are the minority in both houses. And the cuts that they are talking about and the Affordable Care Act subsidies expiring and everything are things Democrats are, though they're pushing against the cuts, they're pushing against letting the Affordable Care Act subsidies expire. So it is very hard for Republicans to spin that narrative. And when Marjorie Taylor Greene has to come out and tell you guys, hey, we're screwed up. We're going to lose the House if we don't do something and fix some of the problems going on. That should be a wake-up call to the Republican Party about what they need to do going forward here and about what they need to do to maintain the votes and to make sure everything stays exactly the way it is. You know, they don't want to lose voters. They don't want to piss off the American voter. They can't afford to lose votes and voters at this point. They are not nearly as popular as they think they are. And one thing that may cause them to start at least considering, sometime this week to start actively negotiating was the No Kings protest over the weekend, bringing out 7 to 10 million people to protest about everything that's going on, and it was peaceful. Now, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson came out and he made some comments about it, and he was desperate trying to spin it. You know, he was very disappointed that it didn't turn violent. Why? Because he again tried to say, well, it was good to see that the violent left didn't burn and loot down cities, etc. And just he was talking about how violent we were, when in fact the No Kings protest was one of the most peaceful protests in American history, with no real problems showing up uh, anywhere in the nation that I've seen. For the most part, like even the New York Police Department said they had 300,000 people in New York City and nothing happened, no arrests made because there were no problems. And the people on the right, they're terrified of the fact that we got 7 to 10 million people, maybe even more out protesting, and that number's only going to grow. Now, I don't know when the next No Kings protest is scheduled for. My guess would probably be they might do one next month, but I haven't heard that for sure. I wouldn't expect there to be any probably till spring, just because parts of this country, like here in Iowa, it gets cold, it gets snowy. People aren't going to want to be out in the cold and the snow and protest. Um, but if they hold one in the winter and they bring this kind of energy in the middle of winter, that will send a clean and clear message to the party in charge about what's going on here and how unhappy and displeased they are with the current administration. Now, Donald Trump wants to downplay the crowd size out there. And he said, well, no, not very many people showed up. It wasn't that big of a deal. Donnie, 7 to 10 million people showed up around this country to protest you and tell you how much they don't like you and everything you are trying to do. And of course, he tries to spin it off, say, well, I'm not a king. I don't want to be a king. I work hard. You work hard, Donnie? You've golfed about 25% of your presidency away. And if you weren't golfing on those days, you at least went to one of your golf resorts those days and were driving around on a golf course or something like that. So, no, Donald, you are not the hardworking president that you think you are. You just like to lie to the American people, and you know there's at least a section of this country that is going to believe everything you say and take you at face value. Now, Donald Trump's flip-flopped yet again on the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, he started off his presidency by saying that, well, Ukraine's probably going to have to give in to Vladimir Putin and give up some territory in order to do this, in order to get peace. And remember, Donald Trump said during the campaign, he repeatedly said he could end the Russia-Ukraine war in a phone call. He could end it in 24 hours. It would be an easy thing to do because it never would have been started if he was president. Well, 24 hours, he said, before he was even sworn in, if he got elected. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of him being elected. The war's still going on, no closer to a resolution, so how's that going for you? But Donald Trump said initially that Ukraine was going to have to give up some territory. Well, then he came out a while ago and said Ukraine should fight like hell. And part of that was because he had a meeting with Zelensky. And in that meeting, Zelensky said nice things to Donald Trump and, patted him on the back and, talked about how great he was and those kind of things, which is how you get Donald Trump to do almost anything. And from there, Donald Trump had a phone call with Vladimir Putin. Now, Vladimir Putin is smart enough to both compliment and threaten Donald Trump in the same breath. Now, he probably said something like, well, Donald, you'd be looking like a genius if you got Ukraine to, give up this territory. Oh, but you wouldn't like what we do to you if you can't get it done. We know you'd look so good for getting it done, but there'd be consequences if you can't, or something like that. And Donald Trump probably fell for it because he falls for everything. And now apparently he had another meeting with Zelensky after previously saying we're going to give you more aid and you should fight like hell, and even floated the idea of giving Zelensky Tomahawk missiles. Now, apparently he had this meeting, and then after there were no reporters and when the cameras were off, apparently it devolved into a shouting match where he pretty much threw Zelensky out of the White House yet again for the second time. Now, why? Well, because he got threatened probably by Vladimir Putin. And he told Zelensky the same thing again about having to give up territory. And Zelensky says, I can't do that. It's in their state, it's in their national constitution that they can't give up any territory in treaties. So Zelensky is going to continue to fight. And of course, Donald Trump tells Zelensky, well, if you don't give in to Russia, they're going to overrun you. Where do you think he got that idea from? Sounds like a threat that Vladimir Putin would have made. And if you've already heard the Rational Boomer podcast, yes, that was one of the things Mike and I discussed. He kind of gave me that idea that, Vladimir Putin probably told him that they would overrun Ukraine if, they don't surrender soon. Here's the problem. At the time of the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, everybody expected it to be over in 2 to 3 weeks, top end, that Ukraine was going to completely fall and, Russia was going to win. They were like the number 3 army in the world. It was like, I think it went us, China, Russia. And with that, everybody expected it to happen. Now, here we are 3 years in, and we're hearing something that they have potentially up to, 1 million to 1.5 million casualties. 500,000 dead just on the Russian side. They're not winning. They are, barely gaining any territory here against Ukraine, and Ukraine's holding their own. If it were possible for Russia to overrun and just win this by pure numbers, they would have done it already. They wouldn't wait 3 years in with those kind of casualty numbers before turning on Zelensky and actually going full force. And that's a problem. Now, when it comes to why should we defend Ukraine, there's multiple reasons. One, do you think Vladimir Putin and Russia is going to end at Ukraine if we just give up Ukraine completely? I don't think so. I think he would attempt to go into other NATO countries because he's already pushing his limits with NATO. We're hearing about drones going into Poland and Romania and some other countries with drones and aircraft, etc., trying to see what kind of a response he's going to get from NATO. Beyond that, there was the Budapest Memorandum. After the fall of the Soviet Union, if you were alive like I was and you remember the falling of the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall coming down and Germany unifying and all of that. Now, I don't entirely remember the Budapest Memorandum as a news story by itself, but I'm aware of what it is. When the Soviet Union fell, Ukraine had nuclear capabilities. Why did they have nuclear capabilities? Because the Soviet Union, the USSR, had nukes in Ukraine at that point. And when it fell and it became its own country, they still had them. And Russia and the United States went, oh no, we don't like this idea. This young, small, fledgling country having nuclear capabilities equal to us. Well, we went to them and we said, hey, we're going to make you a promise. We promise if you give the Soviet Union those nukes back, that we'll defend you in the future if you ever need it. And we agreed to defend them. So did Russia, though. Russia said, yeah, we promise we'll defend you in the future if you need it. Well, Russia's obviously reneged on that promise by invading them. And to a large degree, we haven't upheld our end of it. The way we have upheld our end of the bargain has been supplying them with military grade weapons and equipment and things like that. And a lot of people get mad about the dollars we spend sending equipment to Ukraine. But one of the things you have to remember is when we send them military supplies, a big chunk of what we send them is stuff that we have already deemed as surplus from the military. Whether it's stuff that we intend to cycle out because it has been sitting there for so long and we want to get, upgrade and get new or what have you, we say, okay, we've got all of this leftover sitting here. We will designate it and we will just give it to you. In some cases, yes, we do have to buy fresh supply for our own military. However, we had already intended to do that with a lot of it. So we go to U.S. manufacturers and put in orders, and now we got people working on factory lines making military equipment for the U.S. military to replace the things we've given to Ukraine. The rest of the military aid that we give to Ukraine, or anywhere else for that matter, is stuff that we have agreed to purchase for them brand new. And again, same problem, like what would happen if we were replacing outdated technology, is that we would go in to, whatever factory, say, okay, hey, here is our order form. We need you to produce X, Y, and Z for us. Make those, and we are going to ship them to Ukraine. Either way, it is keeping the factories humming and people employed and putting money into the economy. Just because we say we are giving Ukraine aid money does not mean that we are just giving them a blank check and they could go to another country and purchase what they need. The other side of that is when we do humanitarian aid, a lot of that funding was required by law as long as the agricultural commodities that we were trying to send in aid were grown in the United States, we were required to buy from American producers first. Now, Donald Trump has mostly ground all of foreign aid like that to a halt and has really screwed over the American farmer. But that is how we dealt with it, is we bought from American farmers. So even though we are sending aid to foreign countries, it's not like we are just cutting them a blank check and then they are going and shopping elsewhere. But what does happen is when Donald Trump does something stupid like putting on tariffs, he turns around and forces China to buy agricultural commodities from other countries. And they say, yeah, we're not dealing with you. They did that during his first term, too. They cut back to like a quarter of what they were purchasing in soybeans. And from what I understand, they never brought it all the way back, and they continued to buy from other places. Now, with these new tariffs and everything that are on, they have not bought any soybeans this year, nor they were at like $20 billion. Well, now they're not buying any. They're buying it from places like Argentina. So that's not helping out the American farmers, but it's giving business to Argentina. And of course, Donald Trump wants to bail out Argentina. He wants to send them upwards of $40 billion to bail out their economy, but only if they elect in the guy that's currently in charge that is causing them to need a bailout. which is very strange. Of course, it is a far right wing leader, somebody Donald Trump seems to like. So Donald Trump wants to reelect or have that guy reelected. I can't think of his name off the top of my head right now, but that's what Donald Trump wants. So he's trying to tie that in to getting any sort of aid. Now, this isn't the first time Donald Trump has tried to tie aid into certain things. Remember, that's what he was impeached for the first time during his first administration. There was aid money that was passed for Ukraine well before the Russia-Ukraine war. And Donald Trump said, well, if you don't start an investigation into Burisma and Hunter Biden, you don't even actually do the investigation, just say there is one, because it would tarnish Joe Biden's reputation. He was going to tie up the aid money. And now he's trying to do the same thing when it comes to influencing a Venezuelan election. Now, if Republicans had any class, if we had Nixon era Republicans, hell, maybe even if we had Bush era Republicans, they would be holding votes to impeach based on these actions. However, they don't care about that. They haven't decided that it is politically deadly for them to be stuck to Donald Trump and to side with him at every turn. So he gets away with this for now. Now, we don't even know if that 20 to $40 billion in aid is actually going to happen, because as far as I know, it hasn't been passed through Congress. Congress holds the power of the purse. So any of that is an entire possibility that maybe none of the money goes no matter what happens in the election. And I don't know if it's going to make a bit of difference. If their economy is struggling bad enough that they need 20 to $40 billion to prop it up, maybe voting in a new leader is actually a good idea. And it might be a sign of what is going to happen here, because our economy is struggling, and it's only going to get worse the longer Donald Trump remains in power. So, I think that when 2028 comes around, if things haven't changed by then, that we are going to be dealing with an entirely different electorate, one that is more than willing to vote in a different president, to vote in, a change in party. Maybe give a Democrat, like they did in 2020, control of not only the presidency, but the House and the Senate, so they can get things done. And, I keep looking back at history and, with the tariffs, and I look at how bad they fucked up the economy during the Great Depression, in part because of the tariffs, but in part because of Republican apathy when it came to what would happen with the economy. The idea was, we'll keep helping the wealthy people and the economy will straighten itself out. Gee, does that sound like something you've heard before? That seems to be right out of the playbook of what's going on right now by giving tax breaks to wealthy people. Well, what were the results? After they crashed the stock market in 29, Republicans did pretty much nothing to fix the problems, didn't help people. People were suffering, people were starving. It led into the Great Depression. And what happened? FDR came in, preaching about the New Deal and making it fair for everybody and growing the middle class from the bottom up and the middle out, making sure people were taken care of, that our seniors had a retirement and an ability to not work themselves to death, that people had access to food, and that's where the food stamp program comes from. And a lot of other reforms came out of the Great Depression. And not only that, but it led to 20 plus years of complete Democratic control in Congress, because they got a lot done for the American people. And if Democrats look to history and do something like that after all of the damage that is done because of this president, it is entirely possible that they could find themselves in a similar situation where they potentially could be in power for 12 to 20 years, potentially. It just depends what kind of a candidate they run and what kind of a message and a platform they run on. Now, a lot of people are saying that Gavin Newsom could potentially be the front runner for the Democratic Party in 2028. And one thing is certain. I think Gavin Newsom, while he could make a good candidate, I think he is peaking way too early. In reality, there is only one candidate who has ever been out 3 years in advance of a general election and gotten their party's nomination. and that was Donald Trump. And in fact, the only reason he got their nomination 3 years out, and that was in 2024 or for the 2024 election, was because they didn't really have anybody. He didn't let them move on to anybody else. And when they had their chance to walk away from Donald Trump after the January 6th insurrection, after a while, they went down, knelt down, kissed the ring, brought him back into the fold because they were worried about getting reelected in the midterms. And then he started talking about running for reelection. He announced his campaign ahead of the midterms, which had been unheard of at that point. I think it is too early to declare a Democratic frontrunner. I think there are going to be people that run that you have no idea are even in the mix. And Mike and I were talking about that today over the Rational Boomer podcast about some of the varying people who potentially could be in the list for the Democrats in 2028. And I think there might not be anybody out of that list. Or if you remember history, if you go back to the George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton election, a lot of Democrats expected George H.W. Bush to sail into reelection because the economy had been doing pretty good and things were going well. And then the economy tanked. And sure, they had found Bill Clinton to be the nominee, but he was somebody they kind of threw into that race. And we weren't expecting him to actually win. Well, I can't say we. I was rather young at the time of Bill Clinton's presidency. I couldn't vote yet. But I remember reading about the things going on with Bill Clinton getting elected, and it was because the economy went to shit. And if the economy is in the shitter, the American people are not going to want to stick with the same party that is in power. So the Republicans may have to find a way to get rid of Donald Trump. And if they can't get rid of Donald Trump going into 28, they may run a candidate they know will not win against a Democrat, let the Democrats have the win in 28, and try to rebrand going into 2032 as far as coming up with, a better strategy, and then say, well, and try to do what they always do. Even though the economy's better, if it's not, perfect, well, things aren't doing too good under this Democrat. See, didn't he promise to make things better? Well, vote for the Republican. And, we'll fix everything again, and hope people were dumb enough to vote him in a second time, and that they were dumb enough to give them access to the levers of power again. So we'll have to see how things play out, but I think Gavin Newsom has peaked a little bit too early for him to be the front runner. There are a lot of other good candidates on the Democratic side of the aisle. Now, speaking of making things better and trying to do things to help the American people, Donald Trump has parts of a plan when it comes to helping out the economy. And what are those parts of a plan? Well, he has talked about the idea and floated this idea once again with helping out Argentina and buying beef from Argentina. Now, different countries have different standards for what is acceptable, and I don't know how they compare to U.S. standards. But beef is getting really expensive here, and I'm seeing a lot of people talking about what they can use in place of beef in recipes, switching over to pork, or maybe making more ground pork dishes, sausage dishes instead of beef, using chicken or ground turkey or something like that, just because it's cheaper, or foregoing beef altogether and just saying, well, we're having pasta and sauce instead of actual spaghetti, with a meat sauce. With the economy going bad, people are looking for ways to save money. Well, Donald Trump says, yeah, we should buy some, not a lot, but some beef from Argentina. But he didn't float out any more of that idea. He didn't flesh it out. This is probably like his concepts of a healthcare plan, where he has ideas of what is going on, and he suggests buying some beef from Argentina. But how does that help American farmers and American cattle ranchers? Well, it doesn't. Not at all. How about instead of buying from them, how about we give them some subsidies, or maybe you actually give them the bailout you promised to make it more affordable for them, so they're not going broke because all of the contracts you canceled by canceling U.S. foreign aid money because they were required by law to buy from American producers? Or how about you do the bailout because of the fact that your tariffs have caused places like China to not buy from U.S. farms and to buy from the U.S. at all? How about you do something like that? No? Instead, we're going to go to Argentina. Okay. Now, we have no idea how much beef we're talking about here. Um, but anything coming in would help, yes, they'll probably lower the price because you get another supply. But at what cost? Because now, if we are buying, and it is cheaper to get from a foreign country, that means that's going to be less beef sold by that is grown by Americans, or they're going to have to sell it at a much lower price, which means they're going to be again losing money and potentially in need of yet even more of a bailout. But Donald Trump hasn't even done the first bailout. Now he's talking about doing a bailout, but he hasn't done one yet. But he would need Congress to approve any sort of a bailout because he doesn't have the access to the funds unilaterally to move them around like he would like to. So, with all of it going on, his grand plan is to buy beef from Argentina while he is single handedly ruining American farms. And then you have JD Vance having a company which I can't think of the name of that aid company or that farm company right now, but they're swooping in and they are buying farmland up, cheap as these family farms are getting run out of business, and then turning around and saying, well, we bought your farmland, but we'll pay you XYZ to grow the crops on it. Just keep doing what you were doing, and basically turning them back into sharecroppers. And you're having family farmers go out of business in place of major corporations. And that ultimately would be untenable. Republicans have gotten the farm vote on their side for years now. And yet, at every turn, it seems like this administration in particular is doing things to screw over farmers. You would have thought they would have learned by now that the Republicans really aren't there to help. But what happened? Did they vote for Donald Trump? Well, in part because even though Donald Trump screwed them during the first election, that they ended up having a bailout. So he made them whole, even though he screwed everything up. He gave them money. So they thought, well, even if he screws up again this time around, he'll come to our aid and he'll make it okay. So we won't be bad. So there won't be any negative consequences to our vote. And it doesn't sound like that's going to happen this time. Now, maybe they do come to some kind of a term, and maybe they do come up with some kind of a bailout, and they help the American farmer. That would be great. They actually do need it, but they're also feeling the effects of their own vote, and maybe they will learn this time and not vote for the Republican next time around. At one time, Democrats had the farm vote. They had the rural vote. They had the working class American vote. And they've kind of gotten away from that kind of messaging. They need to get back to doing what they do or what they used to do well. And that was messaging to the poor and the middle classes, get the blue collar workers, the farmers, etc., back on their side and away from voting for Republicans. Because Republicans aren't there to help anybody right now. Ultimately, I think the Republican Party is knowing that their time is running short. They are getting rather weak about doing everything they're doing. So they have to do the things they have to do. That's why they're trying to gerrymander and they're trying to do voter suppression and things like that, because they're afraid that there's going to be mass turnout in the midterms. And when voters turn out, Republicans tend to lose. Now, some of the things that they have done, like here in Iowa, some of the things they did to suppress the vote is they made it so that there was fewer days of early voting. They made it more difficult to do mail-in voting. They made other requirements so that you had to go and request your mail-in ballot, I believe, in person from the county auditor where you live, I believe. But it wasn't just, they did prevent them from being just mailed out to you like they were during the pandemic. And they realized that if you made it easy for people to vote, that voters turned out, and then look what happened. Joe Biden gets elected with a number of voters that had never happened before, in part because they made it easier to vote, and in part because of how shitty everything was going because of Donald Trump and his complete and total mishandling of COVID. So as we gear into the midterms, we are getting closer and closer to primary season. We need to start looking and watching to see who is getting primaried. I'm hearing that there are primary challengers for people like Nancy Pelosi and some other long-term Democrats. And maybe it is time that we vote in a change, especially in safe areas. Like, for example, Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco. There is no reason that we can't elect another Democrat in San Francisco. And that's not a knock on Nancy Pelosi. Simple fact of the matter is, she is in her 80s. It is time for somebody younger, and hers is a safe district. It's not like what we were dealing with when we had Joe Manchin in the Senate from West Virginia. We don't have a blue dot in a very red state running for a statewide position he could get elected. So we dealt with him, even though he wasn't the best fit and he wasn't necessarily a good Democrat. It was because he was going to win in an area where Democrats typically couldn't win. And then when he didn't run for reelection, look what happened. West Virginia voted in a Republican. So I think some of these Democrats need to start being worried about being voted out in the primaries, especially in safe places. San Francisco, maybe statewide in New York with Chuck Schumer. Some people are worried that one of the reasons he's trying to hold so tough on this government shutdown is because he's afraid of a primary challenge. Some people are suggesting AOC might run against him and try to unseat him in the Senate in a primary. Now, that could be an interesting race. I have no idea who would win in that one in a primary. But because people are tired of some of the same things that are going on, Democrats need to worry about what is happening here. They need to worry about getting primaried out by their own party because they're getting sick and tired of old school Democrats. We need to change how we approach things. This government shutdown fight is a good sign. It's a step in the right direction. We need to make sure that we get control of the House. And if by some miracle, and it's not outside of the realm of possibility, but it's an uphill fight, if they get control of the Senate in the midterms, that would prevent Donald Trump from putting in anybody else crazy in the Senate. If the Democrats had held the Senate in the 2024 general election, people like Dr. Oz and RFK Jr. and Linda McMahon never would have made it through Senate confirmation because the Democrats would have been in control. They would have been the one. They would have been able to bypass it with 51 votes at every turn and block a lot of what Donald Trump is wanting to do. Now, I think Democrats end up taking the House by 30 to 40, maybe 50 seats, and really sending a message to Republicans. And they might grind a lot of what happens to a halt, but we need to also focus on the Senate because if something happens, and in the last couple of years of his presidency, people like Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito decide to retire, being afraid that a Democrat is going to be elected in 2028, then it's entirely possible Donald Trump could appoint another very conservative Supreme Court justice. And we don't need to have him put somebody just as bad as a Thomas or Alito on the court, especially if they're much younger, where they could be sitting on that Supreme Court for about the next 20, 30, 35 years or more. And we've got other things we need to do to reform the Supreme Court, and we can talk about that on another episode. So that is everything I got for you today. I want to thank you for joining me here on the Analytical Iowan podcast. It was a long stretch to get through, pulling double duty today. Like I said in the open, not only did I record this podcast, but I was also over on the Rational Boomer podcast. I encourage you to check out my appearance over there. If you're not following Mike, you should. He's got some great content, great insight. And if you enjoy what I say, well, you get an even longer dose of me today by going to check me out over on the Rational Boomer podcast. And I know I'm going to be back on that show again here coming up in the very near future. I'm over there quite a bit. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I'll be back tomorrow as we break down even more of the craziness that is going on in politics in this country.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.